Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of November of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with the situation in the city of Dnipro. Today, more precisely yesterday on the evening of the 22nd of November, we got the first satellite pictures that show us the differences between the situation on the territory of Yuzhmash industrial zone on the 17th of November and the 22nd of November. So according to this picture, it's very difficult to see the differences, of course, but if you are familiar with the situation, if you know what to search, you might find some differences, and the differences are taking place in the central part in this area. Once again, this is the picture by the end of the 17th of November. This is by the big end of the 22nd of November. So here we can see the consequences of Russian Oreshnik strike. Of course, we are not watching and seeing the ruins or something like this. Most likely the real damage and the most of the damage was dealt below the surface in the underground facilities. Anyway, yet we haven't received anything that can give us more or less reliable information about the real results of that attack, but I believe that the damage was very huge for the painful and huge for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move to the airfield in the southeastern part of Dnipro. If you remember, yesterday we were talking that there were several Iskander strikes on the territory of Dnipro, and today, this morning on the 23rd of November, we received the geolocations and videos of what exactly was attacked by the Russians. On the first seconds of this video, we can see the hidden MiG-29 fighter of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians attacked this territory with the use of Iskander with a cluster munition, with a cluster round. So the MiG-29 was destroyed. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue advancing and where the Russians continue attacking in the direction of Velyka Novosilka. You know that the situation in this region is very critical, and that was confirmed not just by the pro-Russian resources or neutral resources. The most important is that this information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians are saying that extremely difficult times near Velyka Novosilka. Only today the Russian armed forces stormed in several columns, one of at least 5 armored vehicles on Novosilka itself. Another 2 armored vehicles is landing south of Razdolne. At least 6 armored vehicles flew into Razdolne, dropping soldiers in the village, and many other different statements and different words describing the situation in this direction. And based on this report, we have several changes on the ground that was published both by neutral mappers and by pro-Ukrainian mappers, and as you can see, the village of Razdolne is already semi-encircled by the Russians, and once again, according to Ukrainians, several Russian units entered the village itself, and currently there are very heavy clashes on the territory of this settlement. Anyway, as for the northern part, as for the northern and the northeastern flank of the Velyka Novosilka direction, we have just the posts, reports, and let's say different changes on different mappers. But as for the southern and the southeastern direction, we have a lots of very interesting changes. We have a lots of very interesting updates, and this is the most important. Today, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how exactly the Russians were attacking in the direction of Velyka Novosilka. As you can see, the Russians were using the significant number of armored vehicles, personal carriers, and tanks. The Russians were attacking, as the Ukrainians were describing, using lots of columns, lots of convoys, lots of vehicles, lots of roads of attacks. The Russians were moving slowly, step by step. The Ukrainians were using the significant number of drones to stop the Russians, to slow them down. Some of the vehicles and personnel carriers were damaged and destroyed. Some of them managed to reach the target and to land infantry. So a lot of episodes, as you can see, we can watch this video for a very long period, this like up to 3 minutes. We will not do this, but one of the place that was geolocated during that video took place exactly in this point. So summarizing everything, the Russians at least managed to enter this territory and to land infantry. Maybe the Russians managed to move even further and to take under control the southeastern farms. We don't know this, but there is a possibility that something like this happened. Anyway, based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and the entire southeastern part, this one was colored in Russian favor. A little bit later, we got another video that was published by the same brigade, the 3rd separate battalion of the 20th separate brigade of the armored forces of Ukraine, and in this video we can see how everything began. So the Russians were attacking the city of Velyka Novosilka, began their attacks not on the night between 22nd and 23rd. The offensive started somewhere on the 20th of November, and during the previous several days the Russians made lots of attempts, and for example, as for this video, one of the geolocations took place in the vicinity of Novomayorska. So, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the Russians were using these roads of attack, and as a result of clashes, they managed to shorten the distance between the farms. It's already the territory of Velyka Novosilka and these three lines, and currently the distance is already less than 600 meters, which means that there are already clashes on the territory of these farms. So now let's take a look at the dynamic, how the situation was developing. As I told you, and the Russians began their offensive operation on the 20th of November. This is the situation by the end of the 20th of November. This is the situation by the end of the 21st of November. The Russians improved their positions in the northwestern direction of Donetsk, and we start receiving first updates that the sabotage and reconnaissance group managed to enter the village of Razdolne. By the end of the 22nd of November, we start receiving updates that the Russians are about to finish the semi-encirclement of the village Razdolne, and the Russians managed to get as close as possible to the village of Velyka Novosilka from the east. And by the end of the 23rd of November, we have geolocations, proofs, we have everything that confirm that Ukrainians are about to be defeated on the line between Razdolne and Velyka Novosilka, and that Ukrainians are about to start retreating in the Zaporozhye and Dnipro direction. Because if you take a look at this map, you will see that there are almost nothing behind Velyka Novosilka, just small villages which are not the real defense, which are not the real barrier that can stop or at least to slow down the Russians. Okay, let's wait what is going to be next. Probably tomorrow the Russians will secure farms and this stronghold, and then the real battle for the village is going to begin. Now let's talk about the stronghold of Uspenovka. As you can see, there are also lots of different icons, lots of different things. First of all, the Russians are attacking this territory from many directions. The Russians are trying to attack the Ukrainians on the line between the villages of Trudova and Uspenovka itself. And today we got report that the village of Trudova, the Russians are trying to expand their control zone to the north and west of the settlement, and which means that there are still Ukrainian presence, and it's not a very easy job because Ukrainians have possibilities to always send reinforcements and reserves to slow the Russians down. They understand the value of this intersection of roads and the stronghold of the under control of the 72nd Brigade. If Ukrainians lose the control over this territory, then several thousands of Ukrainians would be caught in cauldron in this pocket, so that's why they still try to slow the Russians down. As for the line between Romanovka and Ilinka, we have two icons. First, we have some changes on the ground according to different mappers. The Russians managed to improve their positions and to get very close to the settlement itself. The main purpose of this attack is to reach this Shevchenko Street. This is the Shevchenko Street, and to establish at least fire control. If the Russians are able to do this, then most likely the Ukrainians that are located in these farms, in these strongholds along the river of Balka Glinyana would be encircled, would be caught in cauldron. As for Ilinka itself, I'll remind you that several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the village was already captured by the Russians, but maybe there is some misunderstanding between the southern and the northern Ilinka, so we don't know for sure, but anyway, we are keeping this territory as a contested area. And today we got the video from the Russian sources, and this video we can see that in the first part of the video, the Russians were dropping the lists with a suggestion to surrender. The Russians are doing always like this before big storm. First, they suggest the Ukrainians to surrender, and if they refuse to surrender, then the Russians began bombing and attacking the territory with everything they have. And this is exactly what you can see right now in front of your screens. The Russians began bombing and attacking the village of Vilinka with FAPs, with artillery, with different types of weapon. And most likely today, this night, or the Russians have already started, or this night between 23rd and 24th of November, the Russians will begin full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the settlement with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to force them to fall back in the direction of Ganavka. As for this stage of the offensive operation in this area, the main purpose of the Russians is to reduce the territories under Ukraine control. If the Russians are able to reduce the territories and without any possibilities for Ukrainians to evacuate from this artillery pocket because there is already operational encirclement, this will lead to the situation when on these small square kilometers there are going to be too many Ukrainians. So this area would be overpopulated, over-concentrated by Ukrainian forces, which will lead to additional losses during any strikes from the Russian side. So several days and the entire direction will be defeated and destroyed. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Kurakhove. Today we got lots of very interesting updates from this territory, starting from the post that Ukrainian armed forces are preparing to leave the Kurakhove in Masse, and ending with different pictures, different mappers that confirm additional progress on the ground. So the mappers are saying that the Russians managed to improve their positions already in the eastern part of the central Kurakhove. So several streets were captured by the Russians. Now the Russians control around 10 or 15% of the central part of Kurakhove. There is still a lot of job to do, both in the central part and in the western part. We're talking about this power plant and the industrial zone. But the most important thing is that the Ukrainians are not going to hold their lines forever and for a very long period of time. We made these conclusions based on the video that was published by the Russian sources. In this video, we can see some explosion on the territory of the power plant, and these pipelines, these constructions were destroyed, as you can see. The Ukrainians, when the video was published, the Ukrainians began spreading the information that as a result of Russian aviation strike, the pipeline, this tower, was destroyed. But you know that when I hear such conclusions, first thing that comes to my mind, what stopped the Russians to destroy these constructions before, 2-3 months ago, a year ago, when the Ukrainians were using them as the communication of these facilities for communication equipment, for cameras, for reconnaissance and intelligence, and let's say operations. Why the Russians didn't destroy them then? So, and later we got another photo. This is the photo I'm talking about, and in this photo we can see the same Kurakhove power plant, and as you can see on the bottom photo we can see at least 3 pipelines. We can find them on this Google map, 1, 2, 3, and we can also see them in this video, 1, 2, 3. One of them, the biggest one, was destroyed as a result of attack in this video, and as for this picture we don't see even a single one. So which means that I don't believe that the Russians launched 3 FAPs and they were so accurate, so 3 these constructions were destroyed. It's impossible, I believe so. So as I understand, that was organized, destroyed, or organized and controllable explosions from the Ukrainian side, which means that Ukrainians decided to fall back, to retreat from the city of Kurakhove, and now they began destroying the facilities and the things and the different constructions that could be used by the Russians in the future against the Ukrainians. So we saw the same situation, if you remember, in the on the territory of the Vadiana, the village. There is a small mine in South Donbas number 3, where this yes, Bagayavlenka, yes, Vadiana, this is it. And if you remember, Ukrainians before retreating, they also destroyed this construction. This event took place probably somewhere in September. Yes, this is the video. And the Ukrainians also, when they realized that there are no chances for them to hold their lines, they mined this construction, supposing that when the Russians will take under control this territory, they will destroy this construction with the Russians inside of it. And now the Ukrainians are doing the same. They're destroying the facilities, energy facilities, and construction, strategical points, strategical constructions on the territory of the Western Kurakhove, because they understand they have no chances to hold the lines and to slow the Russians down. So now I believe we can start counting days when the Ukrainians will abandon their positions completely. Further in the western direction towards the settlements like Andreevka, Konstantinopol, Bogatyr, and Alexeyevka. Most likely these agglomerations of towns is going to be the next defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, where they will try to slow down the Russians at least a little bit and not allow the Russians to attack and to get deeper on the inside of the territory of Ukraine. Now let's talk about the northern Kurakhove. The Russians slowed down completely in this area, and most likely the Russians reduced their movements, their progress, their speed, because everything was already resolved in the eastern and the southern Kurakhove directions, and there is no need to be very fast to be in a hurry in this part, because anyway the Ukrainians would retreat. Furthermore, we start receiving updates that Ukrainians have already abandoned their positions on the territory of Sontsovka, and they also attacked or even destroyed the central building that could be used by the Russians in the future. So this is the tactics of Ukrainian side. If they see that they can't hold their lines, they began destroying the fortifications and different buildings that might be used by the Russians in the future. As for the Selidova direction, the Russians continue advancing, and today we got reports that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the vicinity of the village by the name of Pustinka. Most likely during the next several days the village would be captured by the Russians completely, and the Russians by this attack would be able to connect and to completely stabilize the western flank of the city of Selidova. And from these positions, the Russians most likely will continue moving further in the northwestern directions towards the settlement by the name of Novotroitsk. At least the significant number of FPV drone attacks on this line indicates that most likely the Russians are going to move exactly in this area. It's also along the railways, as we can see, and this attack is also in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk itself. Anyway, the situation for the Ukrainians remains very difficult in this area as well. Now let's move further. And as for the city of Toretsk, the Russians stopped. We haven't received anything that indicates additional progress on the ground, but during the previous several days the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of Zabalka district, and the Russians managed to improve their position significantly towards the mine of Toretskaya. Very interesting details are coming from the Siversk Donetsk canal, and today the Ukrainian sources of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the edge Russian positions along canal itself. So, which means that this point was captured by the Russians and controlled by the Russians during this attack. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have completely colored this territory in Russian favor, which means that Ukrainians lost their foothold between the cities of Toretsk and Gorlovka and Bakhmut completely. Now the entire Siversk Donetsk canal under complete Russian control, and the Russians have no barriers to move further in the western direction towards the city of Konstantinovka itself. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just lots of videos of how the Russians were moving their artillery and aviation focus further and further in the western direction. All these videos indicate that maybe the Russians have already secured the central Chasiv Yar citadel or about to do this, because we start receiving videos from the citadel and we start receiving videos from the communication and supply roads that goes to the central part of the city of Chasiv Yar. Now let's talk about the Siversk direction, and we got very interesting, probably one of the most important updates are coming exactly from this territory. Today, according to the Russian sources, a number of sources confirmed the removal of the Colonel General Gennady Anashkin, commander of the South Group of Forces, from his post. He's not like the responsible for the entire direction, he's just responsible for Siversk direction. And the reason why he was dismissed is, and maybe arrested, is the lie and fake information that was provided from this direction to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. I'll remind you that according to this general, according to this commander, the Russians since the July of 2024 managed to establish complete control over the settlements like Vyemka, Ivanodarivka, Verkhnekamenskaya, Belogorovka, Grigorovka, and Serebryanka, and we've been talking a lot about the situation, but all those achievements were just a fake information. Nothing of that was taken by the Russians. And this is the reason when the Minister of Defense sent inspection, some audit in this area, they realized that although that information was just a fake, and that was the reason why the general was dismissed. So that means that the serious direction is going to be, let's say, changed. The entire attitude to this direction, commanders would be changed, maybe approach will be changed by the Russians, and maybe the serious direction will start completely different life in the very near future. And I believe that this is already happening because during the previous night we got another video how the Russians destroyed another communication road between the Siversk direction and the Liman direction that the Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces. The pontoon bridge was completely destroyed, and I'll remind you that we've been talking a lot about this territory for November months, and since the beginning of this month we have a lot of pontoon bridges and bridges that were destroyed. This is the first one in the vicinity of the village by the name of Zakitne. This is the second one that took place during the previous 24 hours in the vicinity of the village by the name of Kryvaluka. And furthermore, several days ago we got the video how the Russians managed to ambush and to destroy the entire Ukrainian camp, military camp, in the vicinity of the village by the name of Ozernya. The Russians attacked this territory with the several Iskander missiles with the cluster rounds, and the Ukrainians suffered the significant losses. Furthermore, in the vicinity of Donetsk and Raigorodok, another pontoon bridge was destroyed. So this is the third one already in a row that was destroyed by the Russian attack, and according to information we have, in the vicinity of Svetogorsk another bridge was destroyed. So as you can see, now the Russians are intensifying their activities in the Liman direction, and something tells me that maybe not by the end of 2024, but in the beginning of 2025, the third battle for Liman is going to start. And this is obviously because the Russians are doing everything to start this mission, to start this offensive operation. As for the south and Kupiansk direction, we have just several changes on the ground. For example, in this video we can see Russian attack in direction of Terny. From this side, the Ukrainians probably managed to ambush the Russians. They began bombing and attacking them. Several tanks were damaged and destroyed. Anyway, this is the presence. This video confirms the Russian presence, and they were heading towards the village, towards these barracks and farms. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, but I believe that the Russians managed to dig even deeper. Now let's talk about the north in Kupiansk direction, and the most important updates are coming from the village of Kopany. We have different military experts report that the village of Koplanki was captured completely, and we have the video that confirms the presence of the Russian forces on the territory of the settlement. In this video we can see a Russian soldier that was waving a flag, the Russian flag above the southern building, which means complete control over this territory. We don't know exactly the situation for the most southern street, and for these farms maybe they are still under Ukrainian control, so that's why we haven't adjusted this part of the village, but we see that the Russians already established control for over 60-70% of the settlement. As for the northern Kupiansk, nothing special. As for the Kharkiv direction, nothing special, just reports that Kharkiv plans to intensify mobilization. We are working on the increasing efficiency, that was stated by the head of the military administration of the settlement. As for the Suja direction, we got lots of updates, and the most important updates are coming from the line between the settlements of Nikolaeva, Darinka and Darino. So as you can see, we have adjusted the map, and we have adjusted the map in some parts colored in contested areas, some parts were colored in Russian favor. So according to different mappers, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to secure both Darino and Nikolaeva Darino settlements. That was stated both by pro-Russian and neutral mappers. As for real geolocations, we have several videos from the farms in the southern part of Darino. In this video published by the 80s Air Mobile Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, we can see several FPV drone attacks on the Russian edge positions on the territory of this farm, which confirms the Russian strong presence on this territory. Furthermore, we have another video from this side how the Russian soldier was capturing the commander of Ukrainians in this direction. So we have enough of evidence to color Darino at least on another 80%, but most likely both villages were captured by the Russians. And if this information is correct, maybe tomorrow the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information, then the Russians have no barriers to move further in the direction of Sverdlikova. And if Sverdlikova falls, then this is going to be the beginning for battle for the city of Suja itself. And very huge problems for those Ukrainians that are located a little bit further into the north. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.